Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. Hello and welcome to a digital briefing brought to you by the WifiForward Coalition and the Wi-Fi Alliance in conjunction with, or in collaboration with, the Congressional Wi-Fi Caucus. I'm Ellen Satterwhite. I'm a vice president at the Glen Echo Group, and I run the WiFiForward Coalition, a group working to make spectrum available for unlicensed and shared use. Simple as that. But today I'm thrilled that you've all joined us to learn more about one of my favorite things, which is not a joke, though I wish it were, Wi-Fi. It's safe, I think, to say that Wi-Fi is the backbone of almost everything we do. And this has been especially true during the depths of the pandemic, when so much of our economy and society depends on being able to function over distance. Today, we're talking about the next generation of Wi-Fi technology on the markets today, called Wi-Fi 6E. We'll hear first from the co-chairs of the Congressional Wi-Fi Caucus, Representative Bob Latta and Representative Jerry McNerney, and they'll be followed by policy and industry experts from Public Knowledge, ICLE, Wi-Fi Alliance, AirTies, Broadcom, and Extreme Networks. But first, some housekeeping. As we'll hear opening remarks from the congressmen and lightning talks from our experts, then we'll have about 15 minutes at the end for questions, but please feel free to use the question function in Zoom at any time. This event is also being recorded, so after today's webinar, we'll upload the video from the event to YouTube and circulate it via email in case your colleagues have missed it. But now I'd like to introduce our featured speakers today. The Congressional Wi-Fi Caucus co-chairs, Representatives Bob Latta of Ohio and Representative Jerry McNerney of California. In October 2018, these two congressmen launched the bipartisan caucus in recognition of Wi-Fi's primacy in our lives. It is the only caucus dedicated to addressing the policy issues specific to Wi-Fi. And both congressmen continue to be stellar advocates for smart Wi-Fi policies that benefit all Americans, as well as education for all of us. I'd now like to first welcome Representative Bob Latta from the great state of Ohio. Thank you so much for joining us, Congressman.
Well, thanks very much, and really appreciate all of your hard work putting this together, Ellen, and for the Wi-Fi Alliance and Wi-Fi Forward. It's great to be doing this today because, again, it's so important. It's great to have as our co-chairs, my good friend from California, Representative Jerry McNerney, and we've worked together on a lot of different issues out there, but it's really important what we're doing on Wi-Fi because especially what we saw in the last year. Think what would happen if we didn't have the broadband and Wi-Fi that we had out there. Because when we think about from teleeducation to telehealth to people working from home, communicating with their loved ones, it really got us through the pandemic. But we also know this, is that as more and more people utilized Wi-Fi for more and more things, they found that, maybe we won't go back to the way things always were before. And so it's really important that we keep thinking about how we can advance Wi-Fi out there. And that's why Wi-Fi 6E is so vital. 6E lets us connect in greater numbers with little disruption, allowing consumers to have more devices on their Wi-Fi and not have to sacrifice the internet speeds out there. So we want to make sure that this transformative technology, is something that's there, that, it's not possible without the broadband structure. So we really have to make sure that we have it. And just in the last week, Republicans on Energy and Commerce, we introduced the American Broadband Act, and we want to make sure that we keep getting the broadband out across America, because we know that this is one of those drivers out there that's going to drive our economy. And as I said, that we all found that, I know sitting in this office over a year ago, I was on a very large call, and somebody asked a very interesting question. They said, do you think we're ever going to get back to normal? And I said, I guess the question is, what is normal today? Because here we are with everybody joining from across the country. Nobody, traveled to a location. Nobody came to Washington. But, everyone got together for very, very important meetings. And so that's why it's so important that we keep advancing it. And that's why Jerry and I are firm believers that we've got to get this done. We've got to make sure that we keep keeping this at the top front of everybody's mind, because without it, we can't keep going forward as we have. So It's great to be with you, Ellen, and everyone else today, and my good friend Jerry McNerney, because again, Wi-Fi is essential. It's very, very simple, and as we know, during the pandemic, from just Wi-Fi hotspots and things like that, what that did, but it's also making sure that we get it across, so people don't have to worry about where is it going to be the next time we have a real issue out there. Like if we, good Lord willing, we never have another pandemic. But I want to thank you again for allowing me to be on today, and with my good friend Jerry. So thank you very much, Ellen.
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you again for your leadership and all you've done and all that you continue to do to advance Wi-Fi connectivity. And now I'd like to turn it over to Representative Jerry McNerney, the counterpart to Mr. Latta, who represents the 9th District of California. Mr. McNerney.
Thank you, Ellen. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here joining my good friend, Bob Latta with the WiFiForward and Wi-Fi Alliance for today's event. I'm Congressman Jerry McNerney. I represent California's 9th Congressional District, which includes parts of Contra Costa, San Joaquin, and Sacramento counties. I'm proud to co-chair the caucus, the Congressional Wi-Fi Caucus, with Representative Latta. We work closely together in the House Energy and Commerce Committee. We also co-chair the Grid Innovation Caucus. We started the Wi-Fi Caucus at the end of the 115th Congress. Nearly 3 years later, the role the Wi-Fi plays in our daily lives has become only more critical. And the pandemic has shined a very bright light on how important Wi-Fi really is. Wi-Fi became essential for how we work, learn, obtain medical care, access to government services, get information about the pandemic, book a vaccine appointment, and connect with family and friends. And as we emerge from the pandemic, we are likely to rely on Wi-Fi for more of these things as a part of the new normal. This is in addition to the growing demand for Wi-Fi and other unlicensed technologies that was projected before the pandemic. That's why I'm pleased that last spring, the Federal Communication Commission moved forward with making all of the 1200 megahertz of the 6 gigahertz band available for unlicensed use. This is something I've repeatedly called for. This large portion of spectrum will be critical for helping to meet the increasing demand for Wi-Fi and for helping to unlock the innovation and create new opportunities for American consumers and businesses. Establishing standards is absolutely critical, although it's not always easy. So I salute the organizations and individuals involved for your hard work and expect exceptional progress as a result. Well, thanks for inviting me today. I look forward to hearing about the recent developments that are taking place with Wi-Fi 6E.
Thank you, Congressman. And as a point of personal privilege, I enjoy this policy and this world so much because of its availability for bipartisanship. And certainly the two of you have led, and we see other examples of that. So thank you again for joining us and for your advocacy for both of you for smart spectrum policy. So we'll now turn to the actual industry and policy portion, a different set of folks. And I'm excited to be joined by two experts to talk to us about how these policy conversations come about, designating new Wi-Fi spectrum, what folks are considering from a macroeconomic perspective, and to give us their viewpoints, which are sometimes different on other policies, but certainly illuminate what we're talking about today. So to help us answer some of the questions we have our two experts with us. One is Christian Stout, who is Director of Innovation Policy at the International Center for Law and Economics. He's an expert in intellectual property, antitrust, telecommunications, and internet governance. And the other expert with us today is Kathleen Burke, who is Policy Counsel at Public Knowledge, where she specializes in telecommunications and copyright. So I'm going to start with you, Kathleen, if we've got you all up on our screens, and I'll give my colleague a chance to catch up with us. And let's see. Hi, there you are. Hey, Kathleen.
Hi. So I think it's important, if you're going to talk about Wi-Fi, you have to talk about unlicensed spectrum as well. They kind of go hand in hand. And so for those of you that are familiar with this field and have been working in it for a while, I'm sorry, I'm about to bore you, but it's really important for people who are new to this space to understand what unlicensed spectrum is. And so unlicensed spectrum is spectrum allocation that the FCC makes available for everyone to use without having to get specific permission or to get a license. And so the availability of unlicensed spectrum is really important when it comes to developing technologies like Wi-Fi 6, because you don't have the same upfront investment in getting a spectrum license that you would need to have. And that can be a really big hurdle for developing new technologies in this space. So just that's my definition of unlicensed spectrum. And Christian is going to share some more about the different ways and the diverse allocation of how spectrum is allocated by the FCC.
Am I up?
You are up,
there we
Christian.
go. Okay.
We can see you.
All right, great. Thank you. I'll keep my remarks brief so that we have plenty of time in the Q&A. Essentially, I just wanted to talk about some of the trends we see and how spectrum allocation has worked over the last couple of decades in order to derive lessons about what's worked and what's important to carry forward as we talk about these topics. One of the biggest trends over the last several decades has been an increasing move towards liberalization of spectrum policy, away from sort of a centralized control over how spectrum is allocated, more towards market mechanisms. And one of the other large features that has attended this has been a increasing apolitical approach to spectrum policy or bipartisanship, which has enabled a lot of progress, particularly in the last 20 years, in freeing up spectrum for a wide variety of uses. So in going forward, I think those two are policies that need to remain as part of how our lawmakers and our regulators think about spectrum. We should keep this apolitical, and we should keep looking for ways to allow further liberalization where possible. And then combined with that, I think there's a few other ways that we need to look at that if we drill down a little bit. So in ways of looking at how to make the market work, things that we've done in the past that we should continue to experiment with in the future where possible is we need to find ways where incumbents who have access to spectrum currently or have a license on spectrum currently, they need to be incentivized to yield unused bandwidth where possible. And when incumbents can't be moved out of a band for one reason or another, there's some important uses that may be dedicated to a particular band. We need to look at how sharing and interference issues work in ways to still allow some of that bandwidth to get used. And some of the challenges I'm going to bring up in a moment point to why it's important to look at this. The other major principle, which has been part of spectrum policy for the last 20 years or so, and that needs to be increasingly important, is looking at things in terms of provider and tech neutrality as much as possible. It's not always possible, but it should be a guiding principle to the extent possible. And what this means is when thinking about spectrum policy, we don't want to assign spectrum strictly based on a preferred technology that is picked by a regulatory body. Sometimes we have to. For instance, there's set asides or bandwidth that's been given for like satellite use and IoT, things like that. But as a general policy, where we see tech neutrality, and this goes for a lot of communications policy in general, where we see tech neutrality, we see more success because we allow the market mechanisms to work that help providers discover what consumers actually demand. And then the market can shape around that. When you over dedicate things to particular visions of how technology should work, you increase the fragility of the system that you're building. And the same thing, it's the same lesson, but it needs to apply as well to providers. As much as we may look at a particular set of providers and say, well, those ones clearly can do best here. The lessons of the market and the lessons of what we've seen in spectrum over the last 20 years or so have been that that's not always the case. So you need to be very careful about when you're thinking about deployment, when you're thinking about allocation, making it so that more competitors can enter where it makes sense. And then this feeds directly into the challenges we currently face, and they sort of explain a little bit better how this works. So there's three main areas that I think about the most in spectrum policy and how these lessons play out. 5G and IoT, I think about those sort of in tandem because in a lot of cases, there's a lot of overlap between them, although there are some important distinctions. But 5G, which everyone hears about in the news a lot, it's going to be very important for creating next generation networks, particularly in dense urban and suburban areas. It's going to be in a lot of places, but those are the use cases that have the most heft. And one of the important things that's there is that it offers the opportunity to create more cross-modal competition among fixed wireless or fixed wired providers, other wireless providers. It really has a chance to open up the market for a lot of different uses. Same thing, which is probably more the subject of what we're talking about today, Wi-Fi 6 and other future Wi-Fi technologies. To date, Wi-Fi has been kind of an auxiliary service that has been attached to a lot of networks, very useful. But I think things like Wi-Fi 6, particularly moving forward, as you start to see these greater speeds open up and you see more of this deployment in areas where it makes sense, again, like urban and suburban areas, you're going to have the potential for a lot of cross-modal competition on wireless networks. But the spectrum needs that you have for something like a 5G versus a Wi-Fi 6 are going to be very different. Wi-Fi 6 has a limitation right now in that it needs larger blocks of contiguous bandwidth, which is very hard to come by, which goes back to the earlier lesson of figuring out ways to allow the spectrum to be freed up where possible to be shared when there's non-interference. That's going to be very important for technologies like Wi-Fi 6. And then the last major challenge that we're facing that spectrum policy has to take seriously, but in a different kind of way, is how we close digital divide issues. In the urban setting, I think things like incentivizing 5G and Wi-Fi 6 is going to be very helpful in that. In the rural area, it's going to be a completely different set of technologies and providers that are going to be able to solve the unserved problem out there. So I'll give you one use case and then I'll finish. For instance, farmers in rural areas, they will frequently have hundreds or thousands or more of acres of land that they need to operate all different kinds of vehicles, all different kinds of devices across it. So they might have a large wired bandwidth coming into like one main building, or they may have something like fixed wireless beaming right to their house, but then they have very different challenges based on the geography of their land for making sure that bandwidth gets spread out as much as possible over other devices. Spectrum policy needs to understand that it has uses like that are out there, and you're not going to be able to centrally design those from one regulatory office. So that's the set of challenges that I think I'd like to highlight. I will stop there, and I think Kathleen has a few thoughts she wants to finish on.
Yeah, so taking what Christian said and bringing it back to look at Wi-Fi 6 in particular, and the 6 gigahertz band. There's this chicken and an egg type situation between Wi-Fi 6 and when it was developed, and then the unlicensed spectrum it needs to operate with the 6 gigahertz band. And that's where this kind of chicken and egg type situation comes into play. So what Wi-Fi 6 does and brings to the table is this ability to use so many more devices on the same network and deliver high speeds. And there are two problems that kind of come into play when it comes to the speed of your internet at home, so to say. And it's when you have too much congestion on the network, your speeds go down. And when your devices have to jump between different bands of spectrum and you don't have enough contiguous spectrum in order to manage those devices, that also makes the speeds go down. So in order to take advantage of, a 1 gigabit connection to the home, you really need to have a router or a device that can handle that and that can handle it well, which is what Wi-Fi 6 does. But in order for Wi-Fi 6 to really work, it needs these broad bands, like Christian was talking about, these broad bands of spectrum, and they need to be contiguous. So when the FCC was looking at the 6 gigahertz band, it became really important to consider the unlicensed underlay that it opened up in that band, because by opening up the entire band to this unlicensed spectrum, all of a sudden it made it possible for us to have Wi-Fi 6 work in this country. Because before that band was opened up, there just simply wasn't enough unlicensed contiguous spectrum available. So that kind of lays the land of being able to now have this new technology that is going to enable all of the uses that we've heard earlier about, work from home and telehealth and these, the increased demand for Wi-Fi within our home spaces.
Thank you, Kathleen, and thank you, Christian. And I think it's, as we were doing our prep for today, it was great just listening to the back and forth between the two of you and talking about the history of policymaking here. And I am excited to introduce Kevin Robinson from the Wi-Fi Alliance, our co-host today, in part because Kevin will lead us through the naming and conventions and technology, and really dive into how the industry has actually taken advantage of these policy decisions to improve Wi-Fi 6, but also put Wi-Fi 6E products on the shelves in, gosh, Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think less than a year after a policy decision was made. So without further ado, I will introduce Kevin, who is Senior Vice President of Marketing and is an expert in Wi-Fi's impact on applications, devices, and users. So Kevin, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thanks. And it's great to be here. And, one of the unique privileges I have is to speak on behalf of the Wi-Fi Alliance, which, yes, it's an organization. It's an organization that obviously plays a very important role in bringing technologies like Wi-Fi 6E to market. But at the same time, I'm representing the more than 800 companies that make up Wi-Fi Alliance. And of course, none of this would have happened without those companies. And as I get into this, I'll speak a bit about how that's important and how it's really driving this incredible rate of adoption of Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6E and what we're expecting to see. And of course, a number of our member companies are on the call today. So I always look forward to hearing their perspective as well, because then we are a very, very diverse industry and membership. So first, I think I'll talk a bit about really just the speed of Wi-Fi 6E coming to market. How quickly we as an industry are able to capitalize on this opportunity. And Wi-Fi 6E really does represent a tremendous opportunity in the 6 gigahertz band. It's an opportunity that significant elements of the industry have really rallied around to ensure that we bring these benefits to end users. And really bringing benefits to end users at a very important point in time. And I think I'll get into a bit of that when I try and put into context how quickly we've been able to deliver this. So Wi-Fi 6 in general marked a new era for Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi 6 brings in more deterministic behaviors, more consistent experience in Wi-Fi networks. It brings in, of course, high performance, the ability to deliver incredibly high speeds and low latency to all manner of devices, and then to do it when you have large numbers of devices connected to your network. And Wi-Fi 6E extends those same great benefits of Wi-Fi 6 into the 6 gigahertz band. And it addresses the challenge of our own success as an industry. Wi-Fi has become incredibly successful. Users around the globe rely on it every single day. And because of that, getting access to new spectrum has been absolutely critical to maintaining those benefits over time. So if you just look at some of the metrics and forecasts around Wi-Fi 6E and what we're expecting to see this year and beyond, you have more than 300 million Wi-Fi 6E devices expected to ship this year, with nearly 20% of Wi-Fi 6 devices supporting 6 gigahertz by the end of next year. So going from obviously 0%, we introduced Wi-Fi 6E at the beginning of this year, to more than 20% by the end of next year. In all, we're going to start hitting points in the industry shipping more than 5 billion Wi-Fi 6 devices every single year, with about 40% of those being Wi-Fi 6E. So again, these are very they're impressive forecasts, but they are forecasts. So why are we so confident as an industry that we're going to be able to actually meet these numbers? Well, part of it is through the work that happens within Wi-Fi Alliance around certification. Wi-Fi certified has been a critical point in really every generation of Wi-Fi. And Wi-Fi certified often serves as this inflection point that really tells you, okay, when does a technology go from maybe being a small number of vendors supporting it to something that really has mass market adoption? And Wi-Fi certified is often that inflection point to where you see that broad industry adoption. So beginning in January, we offered Wi-Fi certification for Wi-Fi 6E devices, and those devices can now be certified. This brings immense benefits in terms of what the 6 gigahertz band offers. It brings it to consumers. It brings it to device manufacturers who now have interoperable technologies that they can implement, as well as to service providers who are going to rely on Wi-Fi 6E to deliver a good experience in the home. And I'm sure some of the other speakers will speak to some of the specific use cases where Wi-Fi 6E is going to be useful. Wi-Fi certification also gives consumers confidence around strong security protections, an interoperable experience, meaning that they can go and get vendor A and a vendor A device, and it's going to work with a vendor B device. This is absolutely essential for any technology like Wi-Fi, where you have hundreds and hundreds of different brands that users are accustomed to purchasing from, and they want them all to work well together. So Wi-Fi 6E devices will be rapidly entering the market. We're seeing chipsets that are being certified, access points, the world's first smartphones, now 8K televisions. And as I kind of alluded to earlier, to put all of this in perspective, we have gone from rules to retail in 9 months. So yes, the industry's been leaning forward on this, but the FCC acted in April of last year, and we had the first devices in retail by January of this year. And that is absolutely incredible. And it really speaks to the importance of Wi-Fi 6E and the pent-up demand for just ever increasing and evolving connectivity that we're seeing as an industry. And then the final point that I'm going to make is, I know earlier on the previous speaker brought up 5G. And of course, as an industry, we very much see Wi-Fi and cellular being very strong complements to one another. It's really been the case throughout the history of Wi-Fi, where Wi-Fi has played a very critical role in ensuring that users are getting a good experience overall, whether they're using cellular when they're out and about and mobile, or whether they're relying on Wi-Fi when they're in their homes, they're in public venues, et cetera. So if you care about 5G, you really must care about Wi-Fi. Going forward, Wi-Fi will continue to carry a majority of the world's data traffic. And 5G is going to be relying on Wi-Fi in many ways to deliver on those experiences that they're promising the end user, ensuring that they're consistent no matter where the user goes. We're seeing that Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6E capabilities are being really welcomed by enterprises and consumers alike. And I'm sure we're going to hear a little bit more of that when our friends at Extreme Networks talk about their experiences with Wi-Fi 6 and 6E. So looking forward, again, probably the last stat I'll leave you with is that Wi-Fi 6 is forecasted to make up nearly 80% of all Wi-Fi products and shipments in the next 2 years. And a significant portion of those are going to be Wi-Fi 6E. So it really is kind of central to what we deliver as an industry. It's going to be essential to maintaining the connectivity experience that people have already come to expect today. And it's going to be delivering on those exciting and innovative new use cases like XR that require the low latency and high performance that Wi-Fi 6E can deliver. So anyway, that's kind of my overview on our perspective on Wi-Fi 6E and how it's likely to be successful. And I'm looking forward to hearing from my fellow speakers and answering any of your questions.
Thank you, Kevin. Seriously, the 9 month timeline is amazing to think about. And for some of us, it probably seems like 5 years, but it was a really short timeline, and you and your team, it's been amazing to watch, but also some of the folks we're about to hear from. So I will.
And I think it almost feels like we crammed 5 years into 9 months, but
yeah, no, that's what it feels like. That's okay. It's okay to admit that out loud. I think we're all learning that about ourselves from the pandemic. But I'm excited to talk about, one of the things that you just mentioned on the demand side of the equation. We know that our own personal use of Wi-Fi traffic of Wi-Fi is up. We know that because we all just stayed at home basically for 13 months. But my next speaker, Scott Stinson, who heads up business development for the Americas at AirTies, which is a provider of managed Wi-Fi solutions for operators. Scott's going to talk about some interesting data they have about Wi-Fi traffic and how it's changed since the pandemic, but also what that means for the future of Wi-Fi, because as Representative Latta says, we're not going back to where we were anytime soon. So with that, I will make sure that we have welcomed Scott to the virtual stage. And there he is. Scott, over to you.
Hey everybody, good afternoon. I'm going to be that guy who does a few slides here. And the reason being is that we do have some data, and we think it's really important for you to kind of understand from a data perspective what we've been seeing. So first of all, Congressman, thank you very much for your time and for your attention to this matter. For 15 years, all Airties has done is Wi-Fi, and we think it's probably one of the most important things that we've seen over the last year, particularly with the COVID-19 crisis, that's going to become a major important factor to the success and health and well-being of the United States to be competitive worldwide. What we're going to present to you today is a little bit of data about some of the things that we saw. Keeping in mind, we have approximately 32 million homes under management worldwide today with our technology, both in terms of the hardware we design and the software and our cloud infrastructure, but we're also the brains in a lot of tier one and other independent service providers throughout the world that really control the steering and controller technology inside their gateways and provide that data back into the cloud. So we have a trove of information that we've been collecting over the last 12 to 15 months, particularly around the impacts of COVID. A couple things that we take a kind of a timestamp in December 2020 to look at. In those 30 million homes, we had over 250 million devices connected inside those homes. To the earlier speaker, it was very much in line. One of the things that we're seeing very positively as a trend is the adoption rate of Wi-Fi 6. 12% today, but if we think about that, if we look back at Wi-Fi 5 and its adoption compared to Wi-Fi 4 and 4 from 11G, it's significantly faster. So we do believe those rates of seeing significant increases in Wi-Fi 6 are coming over the next year. And we couldn't be more delighted, as you'll see in some of the data that we're going to present here today. A couple key takeaways. On average, across those homes, about 12 and a half devices, if you will, per home were seen attached to those houses. But most importantly, which was most interesting, was the amount of actual time, connected device time inside those homes. We saw nearly 10 hours per device in those homes connected. That means connected live, actually generating traffic and being utilized inside the house. This was a massive increase compared to what it was pre-COVID days. And we can certainly dive into deeper details around this later on as well, but I know we're kind of pressed for time. We wanted to take two examples to show you some of the impacts, and one was Italy. And we took Italy because Italy was probably the most recognizable for their extreme lockdown measures. So we had a very clear drawn bright line as to when people were required to stay home. But what we want you to take away from this are a few things. This is a general statistical smooth trend of data consumption. We can see here the first quarantines that occurred and the increases there. And then, of course, the full lockdown. And we see this kind of hockey stick growth, if you will, of actual consumption inside the home. There are two key trends we want you to pay attention to. One is the green line, and this is what we call active link minutes. And these are the actual minutes of utilization by a given client device inside a home to that access point, right? And this makes sense logically, right? You can see a general trend. You would expect as quarantine locks down, more devices come online, you see more active link minutes. But what was very interesting to watch was this red trend line. The red trend line is what Airties calls bad link minutes. And bad link minutes are really an algorithm that we've developed that look at a number of different physical layer parameters that typically technicians look at to understand quality of experience. And we've created an algorithm to effectively measure that and quantify that. And what we saw was that as active link minutes increased over time, there was almost a multiplier effect of the actual bad link minutes associated with that increase. In some cases, 3 and 4 times comparative to the actual increase in utilization. That's really important because this is tied specifically to legacy Wi-Fi. And as speakers later on, we'll probably dig more into in terms of the underlying technology. Wi-Fi 4 and Wi-Fi 5, which still, of course, makes up a bulk of what we see in our network today, just inefficiently use the spectrum. So when we see that increase in actual utilization per device inside the home jump like that, everyone is trying to grab the same amount of spectrum and capacity and work to get the same amount of time, and they simply can't. So as all of this congestion of devices come into play, you see an increase in the bad link minutes and ultimately a bad quality of experience for the consumers. So Italy was a really good example, of course, being very early. But as we go across the pond, we look at New York State specifically. And the service provider that we work with here was very interested in the AI that we've developed around the recommendations for extenders. So this is basically, if you think about it in your home, you have so much coverage, you might need to add additional devices throughout your home to cover your home better. This is a pretty stable measurement in most service providers. Once you get your network placed, within a week to 2 weeks, it stabilizes. And we typically see a general trend of about 20-26% of extender requirements. This jumps significantly with the stay-at-home order by Governor Cuomo. What this represented was a number of things. It was basically people now completely sitting at home, having to work from home, trying to find places that they would not otherwise have been utilizing Wi-Fi. You had children coming home working from school, and parents were trying to shuffle their children around, trying to make workspaces for them to work as well. And so new areas inside the home were being utilized for Wi-Fi that were ultimately not ideally suited for it. So our AI was triggering all this with our service provider, letting them know, hey, you've got a number of customers that need to have readjustments of their existing extenders or increases of additional extenders to be shipped out. It was about July where we started to see the trend come back down, and it's since then stabilized, just still above where it has traditionally been with the service provider. But the stabilization was tied to the AI that we had developed and we had been working with, but also just consumers generally becoming a little bit more understanding of where they needed to be inside their home and how to best manage their existing experience. So those were two really fascinating subjects that we saw. But the big takeaway we want you to be thinking about, and why Wi-Fi 6 and 6E are so important to us here in the United States, is this bad link minute concept. Until we see this rapid adoption of Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6E, we're going to continue to see these similar problems of the overall quality of experience trailing effectively the increase in bandwidth utilization. COVID may be tailing off, but we do believe that it's been a catalyst for the United States to rethink how we work and how we live relative to an actual physical office space. So a lot of these businesses are going to continue to have a similar work from home hybrid environment. And these typical trends that we're seeing in terms of utilization and capacity will continue as well. So we at Airties can't express enough the importance of getting 6 and 6E as quickly as we possibly can. At a high level, some things that we thought were really interesting takeaways in terms of the impact that we've seen. The daily usage increase was about 62% in terms of actual data. So from about 6.5 gig to over 11.5 gig per day per home. Obviously, Wi-Fi activity generally increased. It was up 94%, but this is, again, during working hours. So, of course, thinking about people coming home now and working during those hours, this is typically a very quiet time, but jumped 94%. The upstream traffic is a very interesting one, and we think about that with what we're doing here today with the Zoom teleconferencing, but when you combine that with children working from home or school from home and others working from home, you have multiple devices being utilized. That upstream movement of data now becomes even more important. Again, also another really key important factor around Wi-Fi and Wi-Fi 6. And then, of course, the overall Wi-Fi coverage issues, a significant increase in quality of experience problems that our service providers were seeing, up 32%, typically from a 19% trend rate over time. So from Airties' perspective, we have a lot of fascinating data we can dive into later on if anyone would like to, and I'll be happy to take questions around that later on. But we really cannot express enough the gratitude that we have at Airties for bringing light to the subject matter. We really do think it's incredibly important for the U.S. and for the rest of the world to see this rapid adoption of 6 and 6E. And again, thank you very much for your time.
Scott, thank you so much. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say this data is fascinating. And again, for those of us who experience it personally, it's interesting, but certainly for folks who are thinking about policy and moving forward, I'm sure they would love everything you have to share. So we'll dig into that certainly on a future episode of our digital event series. But I would like to now turn it over to Chris Szymanski, who is Director of Product Marketing and Government Affairs at Broadcom. Chris is, I don't think it's saying much to say, he's one of the foremost experts that I know on 6 gigahertz and Wi-Fi and how all of the pieces come together. But today he's here to talk to us about Broadcom's suite of Wi-Fi 6E products, but also the market more generally. And Chris, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Ellen, and thanks so much for inviting me to participate. Very exciting that Congressman Bob Latta and Jerry McNerney kicked this event off. Broadcom has been especially appreciative of how, in the Congress and at the FCC, more spectrum for Wi-Fi has been a bipartisan issue. And that's really what's led us to this point. A couple of key points that I wanted to tee off on based upon our other speakers. So first, Scott, really appreciate the data points. The fact that we already have 12% of Wi-Fi connections on Wi-Fi 6E is really staggering, or Wi-Fi 6, is really staggering. If you think about it, Wi-Fi Alliance has only launched the 6th generation of Wi-Fi 2 years ago. Actually, it was December of 2019. And so, we've, raising the temperature by 12 degrees, it's kind of like, raising the temperature in the ocean by pouring hot water in there, just because Wi-Fi has been so successful with over, tens of billions of devices being shipped. Wi-Fi 6E is really the right technology at the right time. The 6 gigahertz band was made available as Kevin Robinson had mentioned, back in April. And device makers saw this pent-up demand for Wi-Fi and wider bandwidth traffic. And so device makers like Broadcom began investing even before the FCC made its decision. So no single country anywhere in the world had ever designated the 6 gigahertz band for Wi-Fi use or for unlicensed spectrum use. And yet the Wi-Fi Alliance had already begun a certification program. Broadcom had already launched 9 different chips, 8 access point chips, and then a client device chip that was ultimately incorporated in the Samsung Galaxy S21 Ultra. And so this is really staggering, the amount of investment and risk the industry took in bringing these products to market. Typically, Broadcom's customers want to get their devices certified somewhere between 6 and 9 months before going to launch. And as Kevin mentioned, the FCC, when these devices were actually launched in the market, the FCC had only had the rules in place for about 9 months. But in order to import and market your products, you have to work with a lab and make sure that all of the technical specifications are accurate. Those were only published in December. So, many of my customers were launching products almost simultaneous to the FCC publishing the technical rules. And it just showed sort of the immense hunger for this technology. Another really interesting data point is the fact that typically smartphones and hero class routers in the consumer segment will launch first when new programs launch. And so you'll see that, and you'll see laptop computers often launch very, very quickly with the latest and greatest technology. With Wi-Fi 6E, we saw televisions, QLED or 8K televisions launch, which is pretty staggering, given that typically TVs are 3, 4, 5 years behind when it comes to the adoption of the latest and greatest Wi-Fi technology. And this is because manufacturers such as Samsung and LGE saw the value proposition. Who's going to spend all of this money on 8K streaming and then have it lag? And so, they wanted to see these videos operate in the pristine airwaves, the 6 gigahertz band. And that's really the key when we talk about Wi-Fi 6E or the 6 gigahertz band. Wi-Fi has somewhat been the victim of its own success. So manufacturers have ensured that devices that operated back in 2003 and 2004, when Steve Jobs first made the decision back in 1999 to incorporate Wi-Fi in the first Mac, these Wi-Fi devices will still interoperate with today's Wi-Fi devices that are operating in the 2.4 band. Well, as you can imagine, over the last 20 years, Wi-Fi has evolved very, considerably. And so the spectral efficiency and the speed at which these devices operate over the air are, orders of magnitude faster than back in 1999. So if I've got the most advanced wireless service waiting to get on the airwaves, and I have to wait for something that was launched in 1999, as you can imagine, that would sort of interrupt the user experience. One of the beautiful things about the 6 gigahertz band is that there are no legacy devices. So you can do the most advanced streaming. You're on the Autobahn. There's nothing in your way. But when this same device is operating in the 2.4 or the 5 gigahertz band, it continues to operate fairly with those devices that are operating in the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz bands. And so, in this way, we're building a better, more harmonious market, but also being able to, launch the most advanced services. So, around CES of this year, the virtual CES, you had a spate of access point manufacturers such as TP-Link and Netgear that had launched Wi-Fi 6E routers. And you can see reviews. You can buy these products on Amazon or at Best Buy, but very, very rapid uptick of this technology. And what's interesting is that Wi-Fi 6E is sort of in between. So manufacturers, when we're going to market, there's a lot of planning and development involved. And so, typically you're deciding, okay, I'm going to launch this product now, and maybe 3 or 4 years, I'm going to launch a brand new technology generation because, you don't want to cannibalize your current product. Here, Wi-Fi 6E was launched between the Wi-Fi 6 technology and then Wi-Fi 7, which is coming very, very soon. And in fact, Wi-Fi 7 is the very first standard to be specifically designed to operate in the 6 gigahertz band. So there's going to be a lot of optimizations and benefits to Wi-Fi 7 and 6 gigahertz. But as Kevin mentioned, people are forecasting over 300 million Wi-Fi 6E devices, and that was really sort of an inflection point between 2 planned technology generations. So very excited about the promise of this technology, the adoption that we're seeing, and the new services that we're going to see as consumers can expect a more reliable experience on Wi-Fi. Thank you very much. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Chris. I know it was a challenge to put all of the exciting stuff that's happening in a short amount of time. So we appreciate folks if you want to ask questions. I will just remind you that the Q&A is open, so please feel free to use that function to ask questions. While I introduce our next speaker, last but not least, we are excited to have David Coleman, who is the Director of Wireless Networking at the Office of CTO for Extreme Networks. He is the author of many books on Wi-Fi, including, I think, a couple of Wi-Fi for Dummies books. And he's currently writing the Wi-Fi 6E for Dummies book. I hope I didn't steal your thunder, David. And
that's all right.
while I'm sure none of us would self-identify as dummies, I think we'll benefit from your expertise on, particularly on Wi-Fi 6E enterprise solutions, and what you put it so well, sort of what we're looking for in major venues like stadiums, but then also things that we don't necessarily think of as enterprise venues, but they are, like schools, hospitals, lots of places where we congregate publicly. So without further ado, David, I will turn it over to you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, thanks very much, Ellen, and thanks everybody for having me here. If you're not familiar with Extreme Networks, we're a publicly traded cloud-driven networking company with over 50,000 customers in 80 countries. And we have 20 years of experience in providing enterprise-class Wi-Fi solutions. And of course, we're a proud member of the Wi-Fi Alliance, and our access points are powered by Broadcom technology. So one of the things that I'm often fond of saying is that Wi-Fi technology is ingrained in our everyday lives. Wi-Fi has actually become an essential part of our daily worldwide communications culture. And for over 20 years, Wi-Fi has provided true wireless mobility and secure connectivity in the enterprise. However, one of the lessons that we have learned during the recent pandemic is that companies are changing the way that they are doing business. So, for example, employees often no longer need to report to an office or a campus for that full 5-day work week. Instead, they may prefer to work remotely, either part-time or full-time, but with the expectations of the same enterprise Wi-Fi experience. Therefore, the enterprise no longer just resides in buildings, but instead the enterprise is wherever employees choose to work. So at Extreme Networks, we believe that both Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6E are part of a wireless paradigm shift toward what we call infinitely distributed connectivity for the enterprise. The new 1200 megahertz of spectrum provided by Wi-Fi 6E offers an enhanced user experience for all enterprise verticals, as Ellen mentioned, including K through 12, higher education, retail, manufacturing, and healthcare. In the short term, we anticipate multiple Wi-Fi use cases in the 6 gigahertz frequency band. For example, the existing 14 billion Wi-Fi users that operate in the legacy 2.4 and 5 gigahertz bands can immediately benefit from 6 gigahertz mesh backhaul capabilities. As was previously mentioned, we're already seeing a whole bunch of Wi-Fi 6E client devices, and they will immediately benefit from the enhanced efficiency and higher benefit of the 6 gigahertz spectrum. Scott mentioned that Wi-Fi 6E is not affected by the inefficiency of the legacy devices because 6 gigahertz is a pure Wi-Fi 6 environment, and that's exciting. We also see value for connecting mission-critical devices on 6 gigahertz, such as healthcare patient monitoring equipment in this new pristine Wi-Fi environment. In the long term, we are predicting tremendous development and innovation for higher bandwidth applications. I personally think we're at the beginning of a renaissance of innovation for virtual reality and augmented reality applications that can be used via a Wi-Fi connection. For example, while working remotely, an employee might use an augmented reality application to emulate an enterprise office experience. So as a result of Wi-Fi 6E, I think we are poised to see new methods of user engagement that previously we've only seen in science fiction movies. Now, although Extreme Networks provides interclass Wi-Fi in all industry verticals, I was asked to quickly highlight one vertical in particular, and that is stadium Wi-Fi. And I'm happy to say we're starting to go back to stadiums again here in the United States. But to ensure a quality user experience, stadium Wi-Fi must be optimized for bandwidth-hungry applications used by both fans and stadium personnel. These include video streaming, social media apps, and tools for crowd management. So Extreme Networks has actually been the official Wi-Fi solutions provider for the NFL and has delivered Wi-Fi analytics for the past 8 Super Bowls, including recent Super Bowl 55 in Tampa Bay. We've definitely started to notice a lot more users using Wi-Fi 6 in the stadiums. And the data shows us that the average usage per Wi-Fi device has more than doubled since Super Bowl 51 back in 2017. So, what this does, it illustrates the increased reliance on Wi-Fi connectivity for fan engagement at stadiums. And we see this trend continuing. And we think that Wi-Fi 6E and 6 gigahertz is the answer to meet the ever-increasing wireless bandwidth requirements in stadiums moving forward. Additionally, this year, 2021, Extreme Networks was named the official Wi-Fi solution provider for Major League Baseball. So beginning with this season, Extreme is delivering in-stadium Wi-Fi and analytics in 16 ballparks with installations scheduled through the year 2026. So I got to tell you, stadium Wi-Fi has always been extremely challenging. It's probably the most challenging Wi-Fi vertical, enterprise vertical. And let's be honest, so we do anticipate some deployment challenges ahead in the stadiums with Wi-Fi 6E, which I'll be happy to talk about in the Q&A. But that being said, we strongly believe that Wi-Fi 6E will play a vital role in improving the sports fan and media experience over the next 10 years and beyond. So with that, I would say that all our customers have embraced Wi-Fi 6. They will embrace in the enterprise Wi-Fi 6E. Ellen mentioned that I'm actually the author of this little dummies booklet about Wi-Fi 6, and it is the most downloaded asset from our corporate website. And we'll be updating it for 6E very soon. On a personal note, over the years, I must say, I personally am very excited about the future of Wi-Fi because of the new availability of this 6 gigahertz spectrum. Wi-Fi 6E, it really does move us forward with infinitely distributed connectivity for the enterprise. So with that, I would like to once again thank the Wi-Fi Congressional Caucus and the FCC for all their past and future efforts. And I also thank you for this opportunity to speak today, as well as participate in this forum.
Oh, David, thank you so much. When you were talking about stadiums, I got a little hopeful about going to baseball games and like actual football games in the coming months. So I hope that other people got a little bit of a charge out of that too, and just thinking about returning to different kinds of opportunities, but then also how technology is catching up with us. But we have time for one question. I received a good question via the chat, which I think maybe Chris and David, I'll ask you to talk a little bit about. So when Wi-Fi 6E becomes widely available, what happens to my older devices? I think particularly in DC, we are, when we talk about the digital divide too, we want to make sure that we're not making people's devices obsolete, right? And that people, or, we're not requiring people to upgrade in sort of this costly cycle just to get the benefits of a new technology. So maybe, Chris, I'll start with you. Do you want to answer that and talk a little bit about backwards compatibility and what that means for folks?
Sure, Ellen, thanks for the question. So every generation of Wi-Fi is backward compatible with the prior generation when it's operating in the same band. And so that's a strong commitment that the Wi-Fi industry has made to users of its devices. And so there would be no interruption, no impact to quality of service to previous generation devices when new devices are implemented, other than the fact that just the airwaves get more crowded. And so everybody needs more. We've got just massive growth. And so that's really the short answer. David, I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, I mean, backwards compatibility has been a big part of it. Like as you mentioned, we have it in both the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz band. It's kind of a double-edged sword. The backwards compatibility allows our devices to still, from literally 20 years ago, to still connect. On the other hand, it also can add to the overcrowded frequency space and also some of the inefficiency due to the backwards compatibility mechanisms. So there will always have that commitment, but one thing I'd like to point out, as I mentioned when I was speaking, in 6 gigahertz, there's no need for backwards compatibility because we're bringing Wi-Fi to 6 gigahertz for the first time. So that in itself is, I think, exciting.
That's great. Thank you both for answering. And with that, I am going to bring us to a close. I apologize, folks. We just had so much exciting stuff to talk about, but I think the folks on this digital event are committed to answering your questions. This will not be our last event. And I would like to thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you to the Wi-Fi Alliance for co-hosting, and to the Congressional Wi-Fi Caucus for collaborating with us, joining us, and being such fantastic leaders and kind of pushing us all forward. So stay tuned for the video from this discussion, as well as information on future events. And if you have any questions for our presenters or about Wi-Fi Forward or Wi-Fi Alliance, please feel free to email us at info@wififorward.com. We'll make sure that it gets to the right place. Visit our website. And please follow us on Twitter, which I can't believe you all wouldn't be following us on Twitter already. But in any event, we hope to see you next time. Thank you so much to our presenters. Thank you so much to Congressman Latta and Congressman McNerney, and we'll see you next time.